like we are the crew holding down the fort as folks start heading out. But wanted to kind of have one last chance to bring everybody back together. And there are a lot of different things going on today. So wanted to give a chance for some people who weren't in different sessions. I wish I could have been in all of them to hear a little bit about what went on, and also if there's any kind of big picture takeaways from the conference that our staff wanted to share, but also if anybody in the room wanted to share. So if anybody has anything burning, yeah, shoot.
There is one thing burning. One of the key takeaways I got from Denise with Community Justice Project, she's here. Now, she was a presenter in our homelessness and climate change session, but what she said about how organizers came together to present a set of demands that were unified, externally facing, and they handled the internal division between themselves privately behind closed doors, helped to achieve the goals that they were advocating for a few reasons. When you have divided external facing stakeholders that are seen as legitimate stakeholders, you give the opposition an out. You give them reason to say there's not a unified force. There are a lot of different ways that you can do it. And I'm sort of summarizing. I hope I'm getting this. I hope I'm getting this right. And the success that they had came from learned experience of having been divided initially around a project that was going to be substantially similar to another project that they were able to successfully combat because they had that unified front. I thought that was really a brilliant insight and a good outcome, not just for combating climate gentrification, which is what she's working on, but as we think about the work that we do, that really plagues our space, is this division. And I don't think it's even like a legitimate division. I think it's a lack of cohesion. We're not thinking about working in community with one another, and we aren't communicating in the way that we need to so that we can present that externally facing unified front. And so that's one of the key things that I'm taking away, is the importance of that to success.
One thing that occurs to me in that regard, and we didn't talk about it a ton in my sessions, but just the kind of connected to that is like, I noticed we don't have a ton of funders here. And like, in some ways, I feel like, the funders should be guided by like what people on the ground are saying needs to happen. But then like, maybe there needs to be sort of also a unifying effort by the people that are funding the movement to say like, it's like sometimes like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. It's like I realized in our situation, we applied to a funder where like one of our partners was also applying at the same time and like basically around the same issues, and we didn't even know. So like that's something that it feels like silly. Like we should have known. Maybe we could have done a joint application or figured out. And we are of course going to work together, but there's an efficiency there where it's like the funder knew that, like that we're both sort of pursuing these same youth homelessness efforts. So I would like to see some of that for sure.
Can you? I'm a funder.
Yeah.
Some of us say
like,
yes.
Yeah. When you're the funder, it's like you sort of are privy to like who's applying for the funding, right? Whereas we're not necessarily like, and maybe we just as organizations need to be more open about like, hey, we're, this is who we're looking for these particular purposes. Can we work together? But I just feel like in some ways it's like maybe just traditionally, like it's almost like, oh, we don't talk about money or something. So like maybe there's this feeling that we shouldn't, funders shouldn't be sharing that information, like it's private, but it actually feels very inefficient to me, like that funders could play that role in bringing organizations together for that common purpose and effort.
We are trying to do more equitable grant making, so this is a great suggestion, I think, in that area to help organizations with that.
Awesome. Yeah. And I should have said, because I was going to say, when I said that there wasn't many funders here, I was thinking of you, because you were our fabulous helping the helpers panel. And so maybe I'll just segue into that. We had the content of the panel was fantastic. I apologize for technical difficulties, but what came out of that to me was that, oftentimes like the movements need a lawyer And there are, in fact, like very skilled organizations. I'm pointing to Joseph from Regional Housing Legal Services, who are like really know the ins and outs of affordable housing, figuring out ways to like sort of creative legal solutions. Like we were talking about in the session, you know, there's some very obvious things like as a nonprofit, you need to file your 990s every year. Like that's very clear and structured. But then there's like a huge opportunity for lawyers to be really creative and trying to figure out like, okay, well, what does this organization want to accomplish? And can we then figure out the creative way to make that happen? Like, how can we guarantee, like the example was, how can we guarantee that this like affordable housing developer is actually going to develop affordable housing if they're, you know, given the land? Well, you can put in a restrictive, you know, deed that commits them to doing that. And so not only that, but then the importance, you know, with all of that of sort of building relationships with the communities that, you know, the organizations are working with. Can the lawyers sort of also be helpful in that regard and like explaining some of the things that the community might not understand as far as like the ins and outs of all the technicalities. So that was a really helpful session to kind of think about some of those issues.
Yeah, and that's, you know, preaching to the choir. I said this in one of my sessions, but this is literally the job of the National Homelessness Law Center, is to be the lawyers for the movement. And, you know, obviously the limited number of folks up on the stage here can't do it all, but we can connect to people like Aiken Gump and others who can. And so, yeah, if you've got a legal need, anything from, you know, filing for your 501c3 status to, you know, how does this stupid Cicero law think that they're gonna like actually impact our funding, and or we've got a anti panhandling law that's being passed here, we need to stop it. You know, all of those things are legal problems that we can potentially help with, and we want to, and so, but we don't know if you're not asking. And spread that word, you know, to the other folks who weren't able to make it here to DC or online. Louis, do you have any thoughts from exclusionary zoning or any of the other sessions you were in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the topic of funding, this isn't related to exclusionary zoning per se, but I think like the tendency of the legal movement, and I hope that this is something that we've all been thinking about, not just the past 2 days, but like with the movement lawyering, you know, push for movement lawyering, and how can lawyers come to movements to add capacity and not come to movements and say, like, this is what your agenda is from us as the litigators. I think in a way like that tendency is replicating the way that we as lawyers, particularly public interest lawyers, interact with funders in a lot of ways too, where like historically funders have a tendency to, and not you, but funders might have
Not hashtag not all funders.
Come to nonprofits and public interest law firms and say like, this is what you're doing. This is what we would like you to do. So I think like we all in this room have to be more intentional about flipping that script a little bit, flipping like who has the power in these situations. And that's really the only way that like real movement lawyering is going to work. And Paul said yesterday, like the best way to kill a revolution is to fund it, which is true. And we have to reconcile that with the fact that like, we all like, we exist in a world in which funding is what we need to do the work. So we all have to figure out what that means for us. And the answers are not easy, but definitely has to start with reimagining what the hierarchy looks like, what our relationship as lawyers is to movements and organizers and funders, and people with lived experience.
I realize one of our panel leaders, Graham, isn't up here with us, not our staff, so it didn't, but if you want to add anything from kind of takeaways from your session or from the conference as a whole, come on up.
Sure.
Wow. Well, this is my first time attending this forum, and it was just amazing. There was so much great information shared, and so much community building too. I think that was one of the things I got a lot. I met so many wonderful people doing great work, and I think that was one of the greatest parts about it. In our session, we talked, about vehicle residency and about how people are using their vehicles as that one of the things that I learned actually was in this session was the language of the right to residency. And that I think that's a very important message to take when we talk about where people are living. There's an assumption that these forms of informal housing are inherently unfit and that people shouldn't be living in them. And I would say that there's many examples which are unsafe and that people may need better spaces to be in. But the reality is that it is the conditions of having to live in public space that expose people to those risks, to criminalization, to ticketing, to the lack of resources, the lack of infrastructure, water, food, and that right to residency is so important because I think I had never thought of it that way, but that being able to protect a person's choice of the type of residence they have is so important. And I hear that so much among the people that I work with, and I'd never had that language before for that. So thank you, you all for that. And I guess the only other thing is I of course want to invite you all, of course, to the Vehicle Residency Summit that we're doing tomorrow and Saturday at vehicleresidency.org. Geez, I don't know. I think it was probably about it. But it was great. So wonderful forum.
That's great. And to bring it back to my pet project, that idea of autonomy and choice is inherent in the human right to housing, and that's again and like actually written in legal language, standards that have been developed, and so again that just searching out that language at the international level and learning it, I think is really important for everyone, especially for lawyers. As lawyers, we're called to be zealous advocates for our clients. And so if you're not using what's literally the best language in the entire world to advocate for your clients, this idea that, their choice of residency might be a right, at least in some systems, maybe not in ours, maybe not yet. But then you're not doing your full job as a lawyer. Yeah.
And I think it allows us to sort of see the potential in new ways, right? Because it's a paradigm shift, right? By understanding that the person may have a right to that residency allows us to see the value of that residency, to not inherently see this as a bad thing, right? And to recognize that if there is infrastructure, if a person has a safe place to live, that form of housing can be an affordable housing. 5% of the U.S. population is living in mobile home parks and trailer parks, about 17 million people. So it is a form of affordable housing for so many. And I think that thought that that person should be able to hold on to that residency if that is their affordable housing and shouldn't be forced to leave it. Great.
I realized I would be remiss if I didn't say something about youth homelessness, since that's my job. And this was a great segue actually, because a big thing that we talk about with youth, and I think the rights framework is really important, is just youth, in particular, like youth under 18 or the age of majority, like their right to choose what's best for them. Just the issue of, in how many states, like 20 plus states where youth can't consent to even like stay in a homeless shelter of their own accord if they wanted to. So it's, while that's not, we might not say, oh, that's not the best option for a youth who is homeless. Youth should have the ability to at least choose to be sheltered if they need to, without like law enforcement or child welfare getting involved. And then sort of the other pieces too of like, even going beyond that, youth being able to contract for housing, for them to be able to have the right to their own earnings, that if they are unaccompanied and on their own, to be able to receive public benefits of their own accord. And that's not to say that we're not going to wrap around services around youth who are sort of in this independent situation. I think that's a huge piece of adequately serving youth, and youth themselves talk about that as like, you know, just because a youth is on their own, that doesn't mean that they don't need sort of the community structures that we all need to survive. But there are ways of providing that and still giving youth their own sort of agency to know what's best for them, and to be able to survive. So that's something that we definitely talked about in our session, and just talked about some of the, you know, potential laws. And this kind of falls in more of like, we also talked about like reform efforts versus like transformative efforts. Some of this stuff kind of falls under reform, where, you know, if we can just allow youth to consent to shelter, that would be great. Can we move beyond that and have like lots of housing options and ability in that, you know, there's community structures in place so that youth don't fall, you know, through the cracks needing to consent to their own shelter. But anyway, that's some of the other things we talked about within the rights framework for youth.
I'll add that a theme throughout, I think, the entire conference that came up in the criminalization session is, you know, creating reality through storytelling. You know, what is real is, you know, what we say is real. The opposition is telling a story. We know that their story is filled with lies. And there are ways that we should construct reality. We do that in cases by ensuring that we have a thoroughly developed factual record. Kirsten Anderson talked about that in the context of cases challenging criminalization, where you can knock down every possible avenue for arguing that people are voluntarily living outside or that they have adequate options. You know, those things are able to be constructed through the factual record. But there was a really powerful moment, I think, in the Martin session around this narrative and the story we tell about labor and what's legitimate labor. And that's, you know, another kind of theme is that so much of our law is premised on this idea of forcing labor from people, historically Black people, to participate in a system that enriches some at the expense of others. And that notion of labor and what's legitimate labor pervades other things that we think about as well. And it goes to the heart of one of the main myths about homelessness, is that people are unhoused because they want labor. And Kelly Miller, I think, had you know, one of the more powerful moments of the conference when she talked about the labor inherent in meeting your basic needs when you're living outside. So we tell the story about you know, what it means and what labor is. Labor is survival. Labor is helping your neighbors survive. Labor is something that is not always compensated, and we need to recognize that. Wealth accumulation has been available to some communities, not others. And all of those things, I think, are important as we think about the narrative that we tell and the reality that we create through story.
I'll just plug exclusionary zoning also, since we're supposed to talk about our session. So, I mean, exclusionary zoning is one of those like more sort of facially insidious areas of the law that the opposition is using to try and legislate people out of communities and legislate people out of existence. And it's another example of governments saying, like, this is the type of home that is legitimate, and these are the type of people that are legitimate. And that's not okay, but we're, you know, not we're letting them, but it's happening. And, you know, we're trying to expand how we look at zoning at the Law Center, and working with partners like Institute for Justice, who was here this morning, to challenge those laws. And like, it's, you know, laws that say that you can't have congregate shelters, laws that say that you can't have homes that are below a certain number of square feet, laws that say you can't have homes that are mobile, laws that say you can't have homes that are built out of certain materials that are, you know, more common for people trying to build homes cheaper, build more affordable housing, and things like that. And all of those types of laws are making it, you know, they're recreating segregation, they're recreating social and economic castes in our communities, and they're making it so that some people don't have the opportunity to exist in public space. So in that way, they're, you know, part and parcel of criminalization and laws that say you can't sleep outside or exist outside. So all of this is around, as Katie said, like transforming rather than reforming movements, because when we talk about a right to housing and a right to choose what housing is best for you as an individual, that's not really something that's like recognized in the same constitutional structure we have. Like, we don't have a positive rights constitution. So as a movement, we have to be really creative about how we push for this rhetoric and try and change how some of these structures work.
Yeah, that's all right on. And I think one of the things I appreciated most from Representative Macri's remarks was, wow, when she talked about going to, neighborhoods and saying, your neighborhoods have homes. Tell me why these homes aren't good for, homes are for people. Tell me why these people aren't good for your homes. And and just forcing people to sit with that and have to justify it. And how far can we kind of push that that approach to say, whatever the homes might look like, and do that in legally binding terms. I want to make sure that folks from the audience here have a chance to participate and share some takeaways that they might have.
I just wanted to add a quick emergent theme that I saw come up in the sanctioned encampments panel, and I ended up being in Graham's session just like trying to do tech stuff, and I think it relates to, there's like a through line through all these things where I've heard multiple people say in the last 2 days, like, in frustration, we have been saying the same things for so long, and we have had no new solutions. And simultaneously, I've heard all these extremely wise people who are leading our sessions say, unhoused people, vehicular residents, like, they know what they need and they're already doing what they need. And Mark said it way better than I ever could, but if you are an organization that's working on issues of homelessness and you don't have unhoused people to speak to you, that you can say that you are conveying their experiences, then like, what are you doing? And what are we doing building kind of movement, litigation strategy, policy work in a vacuum from being like deeply rooted to the people who for decades have been telling us consistently what they need. And so I think that seemed to be that, this sort of challenge to us, those of us who are lawyers or other sort of in other professional spheres, to kind of reevaluate the way that we are structuring our own work internally to make sure that we are deeply rooted in communities of people who are unhoused or who are living in their cars, because it's clearly we've been doing this for how many, in the sanctioned encampments presentation, Jade from RAP was showing pictures of encampments from like the Dust Bowl. And like, so that's like almost 100 years. It was like 1933. So we've been not making a lot of progress, or I don't think as much as we can be. And I think part of that is that we fall into these traps of funding. We fall into traps of speaking or holding ourselves accountable to the wrong people. And I feel like that thread I've heard come up a bunch. So I just wanted to add that.
Great. I know that they weren't expecting this, but for folks from SPLC brought a whole posse to the party. And so like, I'm just curious, like, you've got kind of a critical mass of people who've gone through this whole conference. Anything you're going back with, anything that's, you're jazzed to work on together or individually?
To feel that one.
I was already speaker.
Just speak.
I'll kick us off. Really, hi everyone, here's Anderson. And I'm here with my colleagues, Andrea, Ellen, Jamie, Tom, and Micah, and we had our other colleague, Shay. Shay and Andrea are both in our policy department, and all of us are on the economic justice team, on the legal team working across the Deep South, so in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi.
Sometimes Tennessee.
And sometimes, yeah, we kind of range a little bit, we're a little rangy. I just love this conference and I love the Law Center so much. And actually, I just want to this is just, I was reflecting on this morning, that the Law Center has been so fundamental to my career and my personal abilities to do this work. I didn't know anything about this when I started doing this, and the folks at the Law Center just taught me so much, co-counseled with me, found pro bono partners when we needed extra capacity. And so I just thank you so much for everything that you all do to really be the legal arm to end homelessness, because it's just so valuable. And you're working with SPLC on our Singleton case, and it's just this is such an incredible community, and I just I'm glad that we were able to bring a contingent so we can kind of continue to grow a national lawyers transfer. That's my big takeaway. I was just feeling warm and fuzzy.
Thanks, Kirsten. Your kickback check's in the mail.
Hey all, my name is Tom. I'm a staff attorney based in Atlanta with SPLC. I'm very grateful for everybody at this conference and super energized to continue doing this work. I came into this mostly to start helping fight against the Georgia Cicero bill, and I learned a lot about messaging, and I think we're gonna be able to take back a lot of really cool strategies to fight this, because it's coming back in some way, shape, or form in the next legislative session. So the session with RAP especially, I think really was so energizing. I want to organize a rent strike or something like that. I'm just so I'm really grateful for all of you.
Hello everyone, I'm Ellen, and some kind of concrete get home rights and email steps are scheduling viewings of some of these presentations with Montgomery decision makers, so Montgomery politicians and Montgomery, Alabama bureaucrats that have come together in recent months to address homelessness, right? It's a step forward, but also, meetings where you can't get started without someone laying the groundwork, which is homelessness is not panhandling. There are people who panhandle, and there are people who are, it's still a hostile environment. But nevertheless, an environment where they're asking, hey, bring in, this was Micah's idea, right? Let's host people, to come teach you and teach us, and let's learn together. And so I'm so grateful for the presentations and the wisdom, and be certain that we will be bringing this back home where it is sorely needed.
I'll just jump on to Ellen that, Katie mentioned there's not a lot of funders in the room. There's also not a lot of politicians in the room. I mean, we had Brett Macri and Councilmember Bonin, but in a way, we're honoring them for their work on this. So they're not the ones that need to hear it as much. So to the extent that you have the ear of any local folks, and a lot of these presentation materials are going to be available on our website. And also all of us are always happy to talk to elected officials about some of this stuff. And, a lot of them, maybe they're in the wrong space and there's a lot of education and work to do, but maybe their head is in the right space and they just need some vocabulary and language to put to some of what's going on in our community. So it's awesome, everyone that is here, advocates and folks with lived experience, and obviously a lot of lawyers. But yeah, we need community leaders who are the ones making the decisions to also be on board with this, obviously. And that's just super rare that happens. ACLU Colorado is not here, but they're good partners of ours. And recently we sent them a letter about a sweep that they were doing. And I send those letters all the time. And this was probably one of the first times since I started working at the Law Center that the county, La Plata County in Colorado, actually responded and were like, can we have a meeting with you and you explain to us what the Constitution says about what we're doing and how we could do it differently. And part of the problem with that is that we don't have the language for what they should be doing better, which is what Mark was identifying earlier. So that's something we need to work on. But then, like, to the extent that we can take people up, get them in the room or on the computer, and actually talk to people with decision-making power, because we can litigate all day, but the courts never freed us, as they say. So yeah.
Yeah, sure.
One thing that I found really interesting, and particularly Tristia just give the last session on climate change and homelessness. Something I heard brought up a lot was disaster. And it wasn't necessarily a focus of the discussions, but this idea that people are being displaced because of disaster. And I'm not using the term natural disaster because I don't think it is natural, right? That these are human-made disasters, and that can be gentrification, it can be displacement, it can be fires, it can be hurricanes, and or COVID, right? That just happened. And I would really like to see next year, if there's a recommendation, that we talk about what happened in COVID. I've been talking with people over last year, and Mark, you may agree with this, but I don't know. But I have seen people in the last 2 years who felt like the house community gave up on them, that they were left to die in the streets, and they're angry. And I think that needs attention. I think that voice needs to be heard. And we're not talking about that, what we did to this community, with our neighbors that we left in the streets in this, when we all got to shelter in place in our cozy little homes. There's a lot of people who didn't. I think we should talk about that.
Next year's theme. Next year's uplifting theme.
Sorry.
Would anyone like to respond to that? I think that's a great point, and yeah, there we go.
So as someone who never missed one day of the pandemic, going out and sitting and bringing resources and aid, I never stopped during the pandemic one day and saw sometimes up to 300 people a day. There was a lot of mixed feelings. There was a lot of experiences. It was actually really nice because nobody was getting harassed, but they were also, again, dependent on food that people dropped off, the churches, and there's a totally sense of abandonment. The county then, of course, shut water off, closed parks. It was citations picked up after a couple of months. So I had to be there anywhere 2 a.m. to document and get the face of the police. Be like, hey, hi, you're posted. I think all of us have to sit in the anger. We have to sit in the abandonment of everybody who's gone through that in order to really be effective. And if we can't do that, then there's no way that we're going to expect somebody who's really uncomfortable with this conversation to do it. And we've got to find the language to bridge where we believe this is going to change and that we can actually change this. I think it's really important to acknowledge the suffering, not beat it down or blame. It is what it is, what it was. And I think we actually, it's important to really to dive into that a little bit and to also say with them that it's part of human nature, and we're determined to do better. And anytime you sit with anybody, you allow them the space to be angry and justify it, that there's a lightness to their life where they are seen, they are felt, they are heard, and now you have a partner. You have a partner in going into county council. You have a partner in writing a letter. You have a partner in doing a video with them or having them write a letter. And they actually, you see them and they believe that, if you show up again, that you're actually they're gonna go through this journey with them. So I think that's a really important point. And I think the time could be dedicated to that for sure. Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, before the conference, after we'd already set the agenda, Miss Kelly Miller, who's been our partner in crime on many previous panels and other things, said, I've been living through the pandemic on the streets, and I want to share what that experience has been like. And I was like, I would love to do it. We already set the agenda for this year, but maybe next year, and we're hearing that. So, but we've got a little time now. So Kelly, you got the mic if you want to share about that or anything else.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you all.
Trista done an awesome job. Eric, he knows I love everything he does. So the law center is doing a really good thing for me and everybody else. I appreciate everything they've done. If anybody's interested in somebody speaking about a lived experience, I've got quite a lot. In a vehicle, on the street, in a shelter, you name it, and before, during, and after COVID. Being a handicapped female, I am not shy. I have no problem speaking, and you might sing me down if you want to. But if you need somebody, I'll be there to support you if you need. I would love to see, and I was so glad when Mark was talking earlier so passionately about changing the narrative. And a lot of people use words when you approach them about something in order to cause you to cringe and be ashamed and be silent about what you're talking about. And I think that's what they do when we talk about homelessness, and they don't want to hear it. So then they mention substance abuse, and they mention, criminals and all these things. Why? I have never heard anybody give statistics back about the housed people and the psychologists that $200,000 a year.
Yeah, it's gross.
Statistics on that. And then that might silence them a little bit because they're doing it to shame us and to shame you for talking about it. And nobody talks about all these people that are living housed, that are substance abuse users, that need anxiety medication, that need coping mechanisms or whatever, and pay big money, for that. And they go to work for 8 hours a day and they can reset every night in their home. Imagine how hard it is on us that can't do that. So maybe if you approach it in that manner, maybe the situation might change a little if you arm yourself with some statistics, and that might feel uncomfortable because they're trying to make you uncomfortable. And you got to flip it, like Trista said, you got to flip it. And thank you all so much.
One more thing about COVID for maybe to flag for our next conference, and like, I think a silver lining of COVID, and I don't mean to be flippant about the pandemic, but one thing it really disrupt is like the lack of inertia and the movement to end homelessness and poverty, where like for so many years, the federal government has said we could never do XYZ thing. And it's like, oh, so you actually can have a federal eviction moratorium. You actually can freeze rent. You actually can freeze student loans. You actually can just distribute cash assistance in a mass way to everyone who has a permanent address. You actually can release people in a scalable way from human caging because we know that it's not healthy even outside of a pandemic context. So in a lot of ways, like we've also learned, and we need to build on the momentum that, as Representative Bush said last night, like there's no reason that we can't have a federal eviction moratorium that is permanent. We've already done it. So they can't tell us anymore that it's not possible. They can't tell us anymore that guaranteed basic income isn't possible because they don't have the infrastructure. We've seen that you have the infrastructure and you need to make checks available to people without housing, and like we can figure out how to do that. But like all of these things we know now are possible. So we can no longer accept federal government and municipal governments telling us that those things can never happen. So that is one thing that I think we can explore as like a possible silver lining of all of this.
And I think that's a great silver lining. At the same time, the moratoriums on the mass removal of people from public spaces ended. It started back up. I would imagine most of the communities here have seen that. And it started up even worse in many places.
Yes, it did.
And yeah, San Diego, you can actually be arrested for sleeping in your car. And there's and in Seattle, I mean, there's all across places. We now see the businesses that are putting in large concrete barricades to block parking spaces, which is just completely illegal. But because of the moratorium on COVID, they feel empowered. The moratorium on the mass displacements, I don't like the term sweep because people are not trash. The moratoriums on those mass displacements were, when they were undone, a lot of the business community stepped in and they brought their own resources to bear illegally. And I think we need to challenge that. I think every time you see those cement barricades, you should raise a fuss about it. In Seattle, we have city council members who are installing them around their businesses and no one questions it.
Yep.
That needs to stop.
Got a documentary about it coming out sometime in December.
Mhm.
Good.
A piece of it anyway.
Right.
Anybody else?
Yeah, super real. Super serious.
Folks in the back? DJ?
Not something that I really talk about, but something that's come to mind that I've just been processing is thinking about homeless families, like the intersection of we treat homeless adults like trash, and then we have vulnerable youth who need to be protected at all costs. We have within that, like we have like families, youth who need to be protected because they're discriminated against by they're kicked out by their parents due to their being a part of the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ plus community. We have a lot of like kind of like other like extreme situations, but I'm also thinking about the struggling family who has kids. They're not assholes, they're not jerks to their kids. That intersection of like treating homeless adults like trash and then having vulnerable children. What does that advocacy and communication look like? And kind of thinking about some of the trends and the takeaways we talked about. That's something that top of mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, family homelessness obviously is a big piece of the puzzle as well, and just the lack of resources for families that need, shelter, housing. There's issues of like discrimination of family size, like you can't, you have 4 kids, so we're not gonna let you live in this 2-bedroom apartment. Issues of like teenagers not being allowed to stay at shelter with families. Like, I mean, it's a mess. So that is a piece that in the youth team we're kind of thinking through. There's a lot of priorities, but family homelessness is in there.
There's so many things like.
Yeah.
Just to throw another, you may already be thinking about this, but just remembering mixed status families, and just keeping that into consideration. And like, I think my area of specialty when I was in direct service was mixed status families. And I had to get really creative. And I think the one thing that I always have to remember is I'm looking at how I'm going to qualify you and how you don't qualify.
Yeah.
And all service providers just approach everyone, including from assessment and the VSBDAT to everything that we do.
Yeah.
I think that would really need to change with the actually depicting people's acuity, but there is resources, right? You just have to go around it in a creative way sometimes. And for the lobbyists and everybody else who can make an impact on that, I think it's just really important to continuously speak about the need for those families and those children who are constantly caught.
And I'll bring it back again, that like one of the virtues of the human rights framework is that it's for all humans. There's not citizenship requirements in that. And when the folks in Vermont were advocating for the human right to healthcare, working on a universal healthcare law there, this was like part of their advocacy strategy. And at the very last minute, folks tried to drop in a poison pill into the bill to say, this will be universal for everybody. If you're a US citizen or what, and you had to have documentation. And they said, no. They said, this is what we've been demanding all along. Universal healthcare means healthcare for everybody because healthcare is a human right. And, against all odds, they got that pulled out. And it was going to be for everybody. And then, it got vetoed and whatnot. But the power of the community, really dedicated to that notion of human rights, won out over what they thought was going to be like a fatal piece of political opposition. So I think, it's another, we really need to be thinking about everyone and doing this. If there are, we have had this as a hybrid event for the first time ever. We've had a number of challenges in that, both for people in the room and all in their living rooms across the country. Yeah, thank you everybody for your patience, both online and here in the rooms. If anybody wants to speak from online, nobody's Nobody's responding. So if you want to speak from online, put your name in the chat and we can unmute you.
I want to say one quick thing. I've been doing this for 14 years. It's overwhelming, like amazing that we're all talking about messaging. I've been cleaning this for 14 years. Now it's a thing, and I just want to say this as we start, like, research is like catnip to us, right? It is. So it's research. It's got to be true. And if you're looking at messaging research, or really any research, if you don't ask the right questions, for example, in Los Angeles, they asked people, do you have access to water on Skid Row? And 80% said yes, and they stopped there. Well, most people get their water from fire hydrants, which is not the help, but so that research, because it stopped, didn't necessarily tell the truth. And when I'm like the only person in this sector that does messaging research, that will tell you about response bias. So if you ask people if they want homeless people arrested, even if they do, they will select no. So when you read this research and say, look, the public doesn't want them arrested, bullshit. Look at what's happening. The reason criminalization is growing is because whether it's the businesses or the public there's something that's pushing the momentum to increase criminalization. So take any messaging research at best a good guess, a good guide. It's not Bible.
I have a question, but only if folks don't mind.
We've had some appreciation, but nobody chomping at the bit to chime in. So go ahead.
I am wondering whether you all know where, I don't know, department can go to learn from people like Mark, right? When Mark talks about supply development, right, and asset cultivation and all these terms, I'm like, oh, interesting, like, you know how to administer things. Like where are their conferences? Because when they were talking about whatever, high acuity, medium acuity, low acuity, and if it's high acuity, then 10 units, and maybe you get 100 if it's low, and you have to have space for on-site management. And then they talked about, interviewing 500 people and supplementing their report to HUD, right, with that, instead of just doing the point of time. I mean, like all these really cool, just cool administration, right? And it sounds like effective. And I don't know, so like, yeah, how do we bring folks like Mark and like their creativity, right, and expertise to our localities?
Well, so I mean, you could bring Mark to your locality. I think the National Alliance to End Homelessness has a lot of resources with all that kind of stuff, and they have technical assistance people who are able to guide you to others who have that kind of expertise. They're a membership organization made up largely of service providers, people who are working with their continuums of care, who speak the wonk speak of homelessness administration. I think with that, you're going to get all of the best ideas like Mark's. You're also going to get, some homeless industrial complexness, and, you'll have to sort out the good from the bad, but, I'm happy to connect you, and there are lots of other national organizations, Coalition, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, Corporation for Supportive Housing, Community Solutions. There's lots of good people out there doing good work, who have good examples that they could share. And so it's just a matter of making connections. Yeah.
Piggyback off her question. There's a lot of like great expertise, like in like at the this conference. Will there be a way to like obviously not like
be like, yes, we're okay, information being shared, but kind of connecting based on like, hey, this year people would tend to have this expertise, or people would tend to have that, et cetera, that kind of thing, like a, I don't know, database, whatever.
Well, so there's a couple things. One is, as has been shared a number of times, but worth repeating. We will have all the materials, all the PowerPoints and kind of other stuff available on our website after the conference, and we'll send out an email to everybody who registered to let you know when all those materials are up. It might take us until after Thanksgiving, given the holiday, but we'll get them up soon. Second, we have our National Housing That Handcuffs campaign, which if you aren't signed up, housingthathandcuffs.org, click on the endorse link. And that's a nationwide, membership list of more than 3,000 people who have endorsed the campaign. And you can ping the Hive Mind and ask these kinds of questions. We also have our Housing That Handcuffs Justice Network, which is about 100 attorneys just working on the legal aspects of and litigation around criminalization issues. But like all of these, there's a network of people. I don't know all of the answers to all of this, but there are people who know people, and that's a really great place to start. We want that, we have, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3, 4, depends on the month, but a couple of comments go out to the list every month, but we would love for it to be an active conversation, and it's the resource there, and we are also building other resource databases. The Housing That Handcuffs website itself has a bunch of great information, messaging, like posters that you can print up and bring to your next rally, all those sorts of tools. And as we start to build out our anti-Cicero toolkit, all those materials will be there. They'll be on our website as well. So yeah, we want this to be a crowdsourced sort of thing. So if you are having a rally and you've got a kick-ass poster that you made up or some great memes, like send them to us. We'll make them part of the toolkit. Tag us on social media. We'll share the word. So yeah, that's a great lead into next steps, since we are headed in that direction. Any other closing comments from the room?
I wanted to piggyback off what Mark said about honesty. How do I say this? Actually, I'm gonna say this honestly. I don't think we're very honest with each other, like in terms of our service provision and what people are actually receiving on the street. I'm a person with lived experience. I got rapidly rehoused with an 18-month-old and my partner. It was extremely difficult. I was not stably housed, working in direct service till about 7 years. Didn't have a living wage to be able to not be housing insecure, right? That is a problem. That is a problem that I still was facing homelessness on a regular basis while I was getting people housed, right? We are not, and then, so there's an issue that we're not honest about what's happening to the people who are providing the service. And we're also not honest about the way some of those people are treating people coming into permanent supportive housing. CSH just did an amazing university on supportive housing for us that we hired for them to come into the county. But at the same time, we didn't make it mandatory. I don't see the buy-in as well from providers. And I want to say we had an example during COVID where our agency gave away $25 million. We came together and built a coalition of 70 plus community partners. We can do it. We can do things low barrier. We can meet people where they're at. We can all be on the same page. We can treat people with dignity. But we don't. Once that was over, it was over. And now, and even us, we're not holding people accountable because we're trying to hold these relationships. And I just want to say, some relationships, maybe they don't deserve to have that power that they have. They don't deserve to have these people's lives in their hands because they're not treating them like people. And how are we really solving the problem if they're just going to cycle back into homelessness? So I think my point is, we just got to be honest. We have to be honest with people, what we're doing. We got to say, we're doing a pretty shitty job sometimes, but that's why we need everybody's help because we're trying to rectify that as well.
Micah, do you have?
Eric, you had asked what the SBLC crew was thinking, and I felt like a deer in the headlight. So I'm gonna come back up and think about it a little bit more. And, I just want to thank you all for your generosity toward us. When you and I spoke maybe 4 years ago about bringing a case in Montgomery, I had no experience in this work, and it's just been such an incredible learning journey with you all, from you all. And we say this all the time to Tristia, and she's been so incredible and so generous, and Lily as well, with their time and just teaching us. And I think one thing I am trying to do is return that generosity, and I think we as an organization return that generosity by continuing to do that work in other places, seeing problems and respond to them. And what started in Montgomery, started doing work in Huntsville and in Mobile and in Baton Rouge and in Georgia. And hopefully I'm working with Kirsten to try and do that in Tennessee as well. And I think I've been thinking about this conference, and there's such an intimacy to it, and the community about it. I love that people are just kind of coming as they are. So many F-bombs are dropped, and I love all of it because it means that people are able to show up and be themselves. And I think it's a community that's leading with values, their values first. And I think that's just really important in creating the world that we want, or envisioning that and trying to create that. It's not just a legal theory, it's about what is the world we're trying to create. And that I really appreciate about this.
Well, that is the note to end on, if I ever heard it. Return your evaluation forms, send them in to me if you're online. Would love to hear. I know there were lots of technical issues. If there are other things we could be doing better, we did the best we could, but please let us know constructively, and we will try and do something soon again together. Thank you, everybody. Let's go make housing a human right.